In this video, we're going to be breaking down coning and how to prevent it during your prenatal workouts. Coning is when the center of the abdomen pushes out a lot further than the rest of the abdominal wall. And this could be an issue because it could potentially be damaging that connective tissue a lot more than is necessary. If this tissue is overly damaged, it could make it harder to heal in the postpartum period, which may cause you to maintain a diastasis or abdominal separation. So let's break down some strategies to minimize coning throughout your prenatal workouts. Hey, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Gina and I'm the founder of Mama Stay Fit, a perinatal fitness training company. We also offer science-based childbirth education courses to help support you as you prepare for your birth. Our fitness programs are specialized within the perinatal timeframe, so we offer a prenatal fitness program and postpartum fitness programs to help support you throughout this entire journey. So big question that we get is, can you prevent diastasis? Diastasis is the separation of the six-pack abs on the abdominal wall, and it is a normal adaptation that needs to happen during our pregnancies. We need our muscles to separate and to stretch and thin to allow for baby to grow without crushing all of our internal organs. So can you prevent diastasis? No. However, we can minimize the severity of diastasis during pregnancy by minimizing or alleviating coning. Coning, again, is when that center abdominal line is pushing out a lot further than the rest of the abdominal wall. The reason why we tend to have coning in the center is that tissue is thinner and more easily manipulated by pressure as opposed to the rest of the muscle bellies, because it's just a connective tissue down the center line. And so when that center line is being pushed out and pushed out and pushed out, it is potentially being more and more damaged, which may make it harder to maintain its elasticity to come back together in the postpartum period. For a lot of us, our diastasis will spontaneously heal within the first 6 weeks postpartum, and for others, it may take more deliberate effort to help heal after birth. And so the way that we can help ourselves heal postpartum and also to maintain our core integrity throughout pregnancy is to minimize coning during our workouts. So two main strategies that we can use to minimize coning during workouts is one, going to be our positioning, and two, going to be our breath control. So the first thing that we can focus on is our positioning. How are we standing and moving weight with our body? We generally want to be in a fairly neutral spine position under load. So when I'm pressing weight overhead, when I'm pulling weight towards my body, when I'm standing up from a squat, I generally want to be in a neutral spine position, which means that my rib cage is generally stacked over my pelvis. Now, during pregnancy, a lot of us tend to favor a more extended position or a rib flared position. So bottom of the rib cage is kind of thrusting upwards as the pelvis is tilting forward. This is a normal adaptation to pregnancy as well. Our lower spine tends to have more of a lordosis or more curvature to it to kind of adjust for our center of gravity shifts. And so we tend to be in this more extended position. What's happening in this more extended position is those tissues on the front side of our body are being stretched and lengthened, which means they're being thinned. And the thinner a tissue is, the easier it is to manipulate with pressure, which is why we're going to see coning in a more extended position. So if we can first position ourselves so that we can move weight, it's going to help us manage coning. The second thing is going to be breath. And in a neutral position, we can best manage pressure within our abdominal cavity, which brings us to number 2, our breathing. Our breathing is how we manage and adjust pressure within our abdominal cavity and within our thoracic cavity. When we inhale, the diaphragm is moving down and it's increasing pressure down within the abdominal cavity. And so the abdominal wall, back, and pelvic floor should all load and lengthen and gather energy so that when we exhale, it recoils back up. So inhalations is a state of tension and energy building. And then when I exhale, I can increase muscular activation and kind of counter the increase in pressure with demand. And so typically when I'm inhaling with the eccentric portion of the movement or the lengthening and the part of the movement that I'm trying to slow down. So think like the descent of a squat or lowering weight towards the floor or moving with gravity. And then I want to exhale to kind of counter the increase in demand. So I'm exhaling to lift up and in with the pelvic floor and the core to increase muscular activation to counter the increase in pressure as I stand up from the squat, as I lift the weight up from the deadlift, as I row a weight towards my body. So think moving against gravity or against resistance. And so when I coordinate my breath to movement, it's going to allow me to best manage pressure within my abdominal cavity to ensure that I don't have any any coning. So it's important that when we are breathing, we are breathing in the correct direction. So inhales are down, exhales are up. If I'm inhaling up and then exhaling down, I'm going to be increasing the pressure against my thin tissues. And so we may have more issues with coning. We may have more issues with pelvic floor issues such as prolapse, hernias, or pelvic heaviness. So I want to ensure that I inhale down to increase pressure within my abdominal cavity, help stabilize my spine. And then I'm exhaling to lift up and in to increase muscular activation to counter the increase in pressure and increase demand from moving against gravity. And so the two main ways that we can ensure that we are going to minimize coning throughout our prenatal workouts and also protect our pelvic floor and our core throughout our pregnancy is going to be 1, to focus on our positioning, and 2, breath control. So we want to ensure that we are managing pressure well and coordinating our breath to the movement that we are doing. But how can we incorporate those strategies with the movements that we commonly see coning in? So the two main movements that we see coning in our gym is going to be 1, overhead pressing movement, so vertical pushing, and vertical pulling or pull down type movements. The reason being is both of those movements tend to cause rib thrusting. And so for a lot of us, we may have some shoulder mobility issues. Our scapula may not be moving very well across the back of our rib cage. And so we tend to have more compensation with those two movement patterns. So as I press the weight overhead, we're thrusting up in that rib cage, which again is going to be thinning this tissue here, making it more easily manipulated by pressure, which is where we're going to see that coning. So I'm pressing the weight overhead as I'm thrusting up in my ribs, and then usually I'm finishing here. So it's usually right around here that we'll see the coning in somebody, and then they'll finish in their stacked position. So we want to maintain this stacked position the entire time to help alleviate coning with the overhead press. The other movement is going to be the vertical pull down type movement. So think pull-ups or cable pull downs. As we pull down, we tend to do the same thing where we thrust up in the rib cage as we're activating in the lats. And then again, we may see that coning again here. Pull-ups also are a very core intensive movement. And so the movement just by itself may just be too much for our abdominal wall at a certain point during our pregnancy. And if we're experiencing a lot of coning constantly and nothing that you do is kind of managing that coning, it may be time to move on to a different modification so that we can maintain an optimum movement for our pregnancy. So let's break down how we can modify the vertical pressing motions to help alleviate coning during our prenatal workouts. The first modification that we can do for our vertical pressing motions is to modify from a barbell to dumbbells. And the reason being is the bar path. As we press the bar overhead, we have to shift backwards to press the bar in front of our face. And now for some of us, we can just move the bar. For others of us, we have to actually shift and lean backwards. And during pregnancy, clearing the bar path can become more exaggerated and really cause this rib flared motion. And so we want to just modify to dumbbells so that way we don't have to clear our head from the bar path, and that may really help with your positioning. Now, if we're still having issues with the overhead press and we've modified to dumbbells, we may need to modify to lighter weight or adjust our setup from a standing to a seated position. When we modify to a seated position, there's less stabilization demands on our lower body, and we can just focus more on the upper body. And so the first thing that I like to do for the overhead press is to have some sort of wedge or something to sit on, because this is going to allow me to maintain a more neutral position with my pelvis. If I just sit down, we tend to kind of tuck our butt underneath just a little bit. And so sitting on the wedge is going to help us maintain a more neutral position. After I've sat down on my wedge, the next thing that I like to do from seated positions is to place a Pilates ball or soft pillow between my knees, because this is going to help me turn on my inner thighs a little bit more, which is going to help me kind of activate my pelvic floor, which helps to turn on the core a little bit more. So we kind of have this kinetic chain coming up to help us focus on engaging in the core to help prevent that coning as well. And so from here, I'll bring the weights up to my shoulders, and then I'm going to exhale to squeeze the ball, press the weight overhead, and then inhale to lower down. So now, if you're still doing this and you're still finding that you're coning or you feel a little disconnected, just lower to just one weight. So while holding onto one weight, you can use your free hand to kind of pay attention to your rib cage positioning. So I'm going to think exhale, squeeze the ball, keep my rib cage down. So I'm almost thinking like pull my rib cage and pelvis together as I press overhead. And so we can modify from 2 arms to just a single arm press from the seated position. And for a lot of us, the seated position is a really great modification, especially in the 3rd trimester, to help prevent coning with the overhead press. Another upright modification that we can do is going to be the half kneeling with a banded pull down. So I'm going to come down to a half kneeling position. The side that's holding on the weight is going to be the down knee. And then the opposite side is going to be holding onto a band with that knee up. So from here, I'm going to think first pull the band down, which is going to help me keep that rib cage down. And then I'll press my weight overhead. So I'm actively pulling the band down to keep the rib cage down. Exhale, press overhead, and then inhale to lower down. So sometimes adding an external stimulus to help keep your core activated and keep you in this down position can help prevent coning from thrusting up in the rib cage. The next modification that we can do for the overhead press is to change the range of motion. So if the issue is shoulder mobility, we can decrease how much overhead we have to go with either incline press or with a landmine press. And so you'll take a barbell, you'll just kind of push it into either a landmine or into a corner, and then I can exhale to press forward. And now this is significantly decreasing the range of motion of my shoulder. So instead of having full extension, I can be at about halfway there instead. And so this is going to make it a lot easier to maintain more of that neutral position because I'm kind of stopping right before most of us begin to thrust up in our rib cage. And so we can do the same thing with a banded press as well. So here I have the crossover symmetry bands that have a nice little handle, and I can exhale to press up at an incline and inhale to lower down. So it's a very similar decreased range of motion with that same angle of the shoulder, but just a different stimulus. So I'm pressing with it from behind as opposed to pressing it up with a weight. Resistance bands are going to change tension throughout, so it's going to be different than pressing a weight, which is going to maintain the same resistance the entire time. And then another way that we can decrease the range of motion is to do an incline press. So we can use an incline bench, which is obviously going to require a little bit more equipment. We can put it at about a 45-degree angle and then just lean back and press up. So same thing, I have less of an angle at my shoulder, so it's going to decrease the shoulder mobility requirements to maintain this motion without thrusting up in the rib cage. Plus, the bench is giving me some external feedback from my back to help maintain my neutral position as I press the weight overhead. So breaking down the vertical pull motions is one we're going to be modifying from a pull-up to some sort of cable or banded pull down. And so with this setup, we're going to be in a seated position, so we have more support. There's less demand on the core. And while doing this motion, we really want to focus on keeping that rib cage down and not allowing it to thrust upwards. So with the cable pull down, we're going to grab a little bit wider than shoulder distance apart. We're going to come into a seated position. From here, I like to bring my hips into a little bit more flexion. So in our setup, we have this little bar that I could put my feet down. You can have your feet down on the floor, maybe put it on some yoga blocks. But I find more hip flexion keeps me in a better position and keeps me from arching in my back. And then from here, I want to ensure that I'm thinking like lean back from my hips, not from my rib cage. So I'm not arching up in my rib cage as I go. And so I think pull the shoulder blades down and back, pull the weight down as I exhale, inhale to lower up. So And so there may come a point where the cable pull down is still causing coning for you because of that big vertical angle. And so what we can do instead is do a straight arm pull down where we're going to decrease the range of motion. And now you can do straight arm lat pull downs with bands such as the crossover symmetry bands, or we can do it with a resistance band that's just attached a little bit overhead. And so with the crossover symmetry bands or any sort of resistance bands that you're using, you can also use a cable machine as well with a straight bar. I'm going to hold on to the band and I'm going to think slight hinge at the hips and then pull straight down and then come forward. And now you can come like super forward where you're really leaned and then pulling straight down. We want to maintain a range that's not causing you to thrust up in the ribs. So if you're reaching up all the way over here, but it's causing you to do this, we need to decrease the range of motion to kind of the point right before you begin to comb. And so maybe it's like right at shoulder level and we're pulling straight down, or maybe you're able to reach directly overhead. As we do the pull down, we're almost try to pull the thumbs towards one another at the back and then come forward. So keep the chest open, pull straight back, try to bring the thumbs together and then come forward. So we can't prevent diastasis during pregnancy, but we can minimize the amount of coning that we have during our prenatal workouts to decrease the severity of diastasis postpartum. All of us are going to get diastasis. It's a normal adaptation of pregnancy, but we don't have to have a severe diastasis to heal from in the postpartum period. We can alleviate coning in our prenatal workouts by one, focusing on our positioning. Are we maintaining a more neutral spine position, or are we thrusting up in the rib cage? And two, focusing on our breath to movement coordination and our breathing pattern. Are we breathing in a way that's coordinating to the movement and meeting the demand of the movement? So inhales down, inhales with the eccentric portion or moving with gravity or with resistance. Exhales to lift up and in as we move with the concentric portion of the movement, typically the harder part of the movement, moving against gravity or resistance, which is going to allow us to increase muscular activation to counter the increase in pressure with increased demand. So hope these tips help you. Thanks for following Mama Stay Fit. If you want more, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We post tons of videos on here relating to perinatal fitness and childbirth education. If you want even more, you can follow us on our Instagram page where we post daily reels, but you're going to get way more in-depth information here on our YouTube page. If you want more than what we just offered you in this video, join our prenatal and postpartum fitness programs where we give you daily workouts, breaking you down based on your week of pregnancy, by your trimester of pregnancy, and then postpartum, guiding you to your return to fitness based on your sport-specific goals. If you want to prepare for your birth, join our childbirth education courses and our pelvic floor prep courses in addition to our prenatal programs so that you can prepare your body, you can prepare your mind, and you can grab all of the knowledge that you need to have an empowered birth experience. So thanks for watching.